Tonight we're very happy to welcome Mr. Dana Allen. This is a homecoming for Dana. He's actually a small town boy. He grew up in the Bay Area and started out with kind of a Silicon Valley flush himself. Worked for many companies. In fact, we're just over at the right side a little earlier this afternoon or early evening, and there's people who knew each other. So here we all are sort of in the mecca of electronics. And Dana was responsible for the company ScanFix. So those of us I think are still in this audience can remember OCR, optical character recognition. Remember how hard that was when you first did scans and nothing kind of looked like it was supposed to when it went in. So that was certainly a good piece of software to have. But later in Dana's career, around 1995, he became suspicious of media and censorship. Anyone here remember Jonestown and Leo Ryan and Jim Jones? Well, I just found out this afternoon that Leo Ryan was a neighbor of Dana, and so he thought there were some things going on interesting with that. And that whole journey into the media and censorship is what we'll explore this evening in a few minutes. Dana has his program at some local TV stations, so we can hear his message. And the organization that he runs now is the American Uncensored News Network. So this is maybe where fake news sort of was an idea before it became a household term. So ladies and gentlemen, please a warm welcome for Mr. Dana Allen.
Hello, thank you. I think I have to raise this just a tad. There we go. Good. Can you hear me well? Excellent. Well, we had quite the technical challenge here, so I have some videos of a cover-up of a murder. They've never been seen in public before, and I was going to tell you about that, and then we couldn't get any way we could get video to the screen. So I was beginning to wonder if it was a conspiracy, but with some creative work by the staff here, we've hacked together a solution, and I think we have it. So, well, the title was Fake News Has Been the Norm for Decades. How can we solve it? Okay, and fake news is a serious problem. Maybe it's our largest problem, and the reason is it creates so many other problems. We get bad politicians, we get bad policies, and the justice in our court system is undermined by bad fake news more than anything else. If people that were trying to do cover-ups knew that it would be reported, they wouldn't even attempt it. But a lot of these people, they can trust the media not to report certain things if they are in line with their philosophy. Who's the target of this fake news? The target is you. And the reason is you people are patriots. You aren't all that interested in yourselves. You're interested in the future of the country and liberty. And you don't want the government to run your lives, and you also do not want to run other people's lives. The people in the media are the opposite. So you are in the way of their agenda of getting a, let's say, Castro or Maduro type government put in place in the United States. And so they target you, they try to silence you, they try to discredit you using lies. As we talked, a very powerful government, whether it's Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or whatever, is a tremendous threat. But when these governments came about, they loved them. The media elites loved Vladimir Lenin when he came along. They loved Castro, Mao, and Hugo Chavez. And if another person like that came along, they'd love him. They loved Jim Jones, who was mentioned earlier. And so you are the defenders of the American way, but they're opposed to the American way. In fact, in the Superman cartoons and movies, the term the American way has been removed because of that opposition they have to the American way. Is fake news a new problem? Not at all. If you told the truth about what Pharaoh was up to and that he wasn't a god, or the Romans or the Chinese emperor, you were killed and put in jail. Still today, whether it's China or Russia even, or North Korea, you're going to go to jail if you tell the truth in the news media. Is it really all that different here? Well, I think it's shocking how much like that it is. Now, people aren't being put in prison officially for criticizing the government, but it's probably worse than even the people in this room believe. And really, in general, the only part of the news media that because I've been in, I co-founded NewsMax, I've been involved with television, et cetera, and involved with talk radio. Talk radio is really the only part of our news media that is not generally censored. And let's take a sensational case. Let's say, would the news media repeat it if there was political elites murdered someone? Then after they murdered them, all the witnesses in the case, the official witnesses in the case, came forward and said that the FBI tried to falsify their testimony, and and when they refused to, then the FBI just fabricated it and falsified it for them without telling them. And let's say they went to the newspapers and told them this, and let's say they also said the evidence indicated the person was murdered. What would they do? What do you think they would do? Well, we don't have to guess about that. That actually happened. And the case was Vince Foster, who was a law partner of Hillary Clinton's. She followed him to Washington when they went to the White House, and he's found shot to death. And all the witnesses have come forward and said the evidence indicated that he was murdered and that the FBI tried to talk him out of it. So we'll go with our hacked together, brilliant, creative system. We'll see if we can show you that.
Many people, including Fisk's own confidential witness, are extremely dissatisfied with some of the contents of the report, claiming that it was conducted in a slipshod and sloppy fashion.
The Fisk report isn't worth the paper that it's written on. They use much of the evidence found from the coroner's report, which we think is fallacious. And so I think that the whole investigation was a waste of time and money.
What about the Fisk report was so objectionable? Well, for one thing, the man who discovered Vincent Foster's body takes issue with several portions of the report. Specifically, he says that he is misquoted in the report and that some of what he told FBI agents who interviewed him didn't appear in the report at all. For purposes of maintaining his anonymity, we have altered his appearance and refer to him as confidential witness.
C.W. further stated that he believed the man's palms were facing upwards. I stated the man's palms were facing upwards. And that he believed. That's fine. I have no problem with that. He did not see a gun in the man's hand, but said it was difficult to see his hands. This is where I have trouble. He did not see the gun in the man's hands, period. But they've got this but. Said it was difficult to see his hands because of dense foliage in the areas where the body was laying. That I have problems with. I never said that.
That's a lie?
That is point blank a lie. These agents asked me numerous times about the gun. Is there a possibility there'd have been a gun there you didn't see? Partner, I don't know. All I know is I saw his hands. Palms up, thumbs out. I saw no weapon.
ABC News later released a photo purporting to be Foster's hand, palm down, with his thumb in the trigger guard. The confidential witness had not seen this photo.
Mr. Burton showed me the photograph, and that is not what was there when I was there.
Confidential witness states emphatically that Foster's hands were clearly palm up and that there was a purple, almost translucent stain on his shirt, but not a blood stain. He assumed the stain was from a half-empty wine cooler bottle next to Foster's elbow. The Fisk report makes no mention of the wine cooler. The Fisk report also says that Foster had a contact stain, blood, on his face, as well as 2 blood trails from his nose and mouth. The confidential witness says that there was absolutely no blood on the face except around the nose and mouth.
I saw none. I saw around his nose, around his mouth.
But none on the ground around his head, none. No wet spots anywhere?
There was no blood on the side of his face. There was no blood splotch on the side of his face like the Fisk report says. It was not there when I was there.
Now, where did that video come from? This is interesting. I was the president of American Investigator Television. I bought their library after the show was on several years and went and stopped. I bought the library. VHS tapes are almost worthless if they don't have anything important on them. So before shipping them to the West Coast, I was sorting through, and I was throwing away a lot of tapes. And I put them in the tape deck to make sure that they were empty. And then there's this one, I was going to throw it away, and I didn't. And then I was going to throw it away again. I just, for some reason, could not throw that tape away. It had no label on it. That is what you just saw. And that's not all of it. It was an hour long, well, about half an hour long interview and so forth. I was intimately involved with the Vince Foster case because NewsMax, Chris Ruddy and I and so forth, broke that story. And I was not aware of this. And so I'd have like 20 or 50 copies of all of these various shows. And this was done by Paul Wyrick, for those who know him, from Heritage Foundation. And I saw this and I was just shocked. And I think the only reason this tape exists is because all the others were destroyed that were labeled, and one was missing the label, and I found it. And that's, you know, you can call it divine intervention or God thing, but for some reason I could not throw this tape away. You're the first people to see this since I found this. That was about 15 years ago. I was sort of sure what to do. I made copies just so I won't get killed. Lots of people have this, you know. But, you know, this is shocking. This is the person that found Vince Foster's body. So, maybe some more background on this. The Whitewater scandal was getting out of control. Who was the lawyer for it? Who had all the paperwork that could put the Clintons into prison? It was Vince Foster. And so his death was very beneficial to them. I'll give you a timeline on this. Larry Patterson, who was their chief bodyguard in Arkansas, got a phone call. I think it's about a half an hour or an hour before the body was found. It was from Chelsea's babysitter. And she was crying, says, Vince Foster, he shot himself in the parking lot of the White House. And so then he called Governor Jim Guy Tucker, told some other people, etc. These people have signed affidavits. They knew that Vince Foster was dead from a phone call from the White House a half an hour before. There's other evidence where investigators found out that the White House definitely knew he was dead before he was found. How's that possible unless they killed him? How did he find the body? CW, confidential witness, was walking Fort Marcy Park, and he walked into the cover-up by accident. Too soon. They had not finished. That's why there was no gun there. He went to the body, saw he was dead, practically no blood, etc. And you heard no blood on the ground. The official coroner's report later said he had a 2-inch hole blown out of the back of his head because he shot himself completely through the head with a .38 revolver. That is impossible to just have a tiny bit of blood here, and there was no exit wound. One of the investigators that went along with the cover-up was the park policeman, Rolla, but he accidentally, Columbo-like, revealed that it was a cover-up because he said to CBS News that he looked and could not find an exit wound. You know, how does a policeman looking at a dead body not find a 2-inch hole in the back of the head? Not only that, a .22 caliber could make a small hole. So he took his fingers and worked it all the way through his scalp trying to find an exit wound. And he said the only thing he found was one spot that was a little bit mushy, but there was no exit wound at all, no blood on the ground. If you do have the back of your head blown out, and I've talked to someone who found someone that committed suicide with a .38 revolver, it creates, and some other policemen, creates about a 5-foot circle of brain and blood. You see, we don't have to go very far into this, and we can find out that the official investigation is a total farce, that no one inside the investigation could possibly believe this. They're just going along with a cover-up. So he called the paramedics and got out of there because he didn't want to be murdered himself. The paramedics showed up, and they both identified a .22 caliber bullet hole right here. Now, this is inconsistent with an assassination. This is the way mafia or other professional assassins kill people, because the bullet will not exit the head. The bullet goes up, you can get in from underneath easily, it bounces around the head, it may shatter the skull a little bit, but it will not exit. It also doesn't make much noise. So this indicates he had been professionally assassinated. So both of those paramedics testified to this. And that explains why there's no blood, everything. You will get a small amount of blood from the nose and mouth because it goes through the nasal passages. So everything goes together. The FBI tried to get them to falsify their testimony. One of them flat out refused to. And the other sort of, got confused. You'll find out about that later. Is there any other independent witnesses? In other words, people that came upon the scene accidentally? Yes, Patrick Knowlton. He went in the parking lot, and there's only 2 cars in the parking lot. And this was about an hour or so, or half an hour after Vince Foster was dead in the park. So his car was later brought to the park. You see how simple this is? Let's show that.
Door with my elbow, and I look over, and down comes the window again, and this guy just looks out at me. So I just start my car and I back out and I leave.
Patrick's account of what happened to him at the park is very important because we know from the forensic evidence that Vincent Foster was dead by 4:30 when Patrick pulled into Fort Marcy Park. There were only 2 cars in the lot, neither of which belonged to Vincent Foster. So that's pretty important information. But then it finally sort of dawned on me, and I sort of learned the hard way, that they're not going to cover it no matter what it is that we give to them. And when I learned that was on October 10th of 1997. That was when Ken Starr's report was released. And it was released with 20 pages, which I authored, which the 3-judge panel ordered Mr. Starr to attach over his objection to his own report. Now, in that 20 pages, it's an 11-page letter and then excerpts from 25 federal government records proving 5 separate points of a cover-up. Now, this is the first time in the history of the independent counsel statute that an independent counsel was ordered to attach evidence of a cover-up by his own investigators to his own report. Now, if they're not going to recover that, there's pretty much, that sort of says it all. I feel like I could have a video of the body being dragged through the park and they wouldn't cover that.
At this point, the American press has a vested interest in not reporting this story, not telling the public about Patrick Knowlton. Whether courts rule in his favor or against him, they're not going to tell the public. They don't want the public to know about Patrick Knowlton or what he saw at Fort Marcy Park. The press, at this point, will look bad.
Now, if the truth surfaces, their credibility is going to take a very, very major hit.
Now he wasn't drugged through the park because the forensic evidence that they sort of fouled up on this cover-up is that they reported that his underwear was all covered with carpet fibers and his clothes. So that means he's carried in a carpet twice, probably from where he was killed, and then later they put clothes on him, which indicate he was killed with his underwear on. I don't know what that was all about. And then carried into the park in a carpet. And then that's when CW came along. They removed the carpet, but they hadn't set up the death scene yet. So let's go further. I mean, you know, if you could have a video of them dragging him through the park and that's not it, what else could be like that? I mean, how about if the head of the investigation confessed to everything that you've heard here, said they falsified all the witness testimony, all the evidence indicated he murdered? What do you think? Do you think, and let's go even further. Let's say he goes out and talks to 100 reporters, gives them interviews, 100 reporters. What would happen? Do you think any of them would report it? We don't have to guess. That's exactly what happened. You're going to listen to him. The head of investigation is Miguel Rodriguez. He's the head of the Foster investigation and associate special counsel in investigation.
Now, 10 years later, we hear from the leading government investigator that Vince Foster did not die the way officials have said. We now learn firsthand from the person in charge of independent counsel Kenneth Starr's Foster death investigation that Starr's investigation was a sham, and that its conclusion was determined even before the investigation began. Investigators altered the crime scene, and a few people controlled the outcome of the investigation. The press controlled how it would be reported. You are about to hear the voice of Miguel Rodriguez, a United States attorney working in Sacramento, California. Mr. Rodriguez resigned from Kenneth Starr's Office of Independent Counsel in the spring of 1995 when Kenneth Starr's staff frustrated his investigation. Mr. Rodriguez resigned because he refused to join the others in covering up Foster's murder. Mr. Rodriguez revealed the truth to over 100 people, journalists, congressmen, senators, and others in his attempt to get the facts of the case to the public. What you will hear are actual excerpts from some of these conversations. Only the voice of Mr. Rodriguez is heard in these excerpts to protect confidential sources. In this first segment, you will hear that Vincent Foster did not die the way Kenneth Starr's predecessor Robert Fisk had said. The evidence does not support the conclusion of suicide.
Okay, all I know is that things did not happen the way Fisk said that they happened, and the reports don't support support what Fisk said. There's really nothing that's consistent with him, committing that kind of a violent act at all. Well, it did not happen the way Fisk said it happened.
One fact about Foster's death was the first rescue workers to arrive at the body saw very little blood. Both paramedics at the scene saw a bullet wound in Vince Foster's neck. Miguel Rodriguez reviewed photographs of the body at the scene and also saw the trauma to Foster's neck. Fisk's report falsely stated, quote, "The photographs taken at the scene conclusively show that there were no such wounds," unquote. Starr's report states that the witness who saw the bullet wound in the neck, quote, "may have been mistaken," unquote.
Both EMTs, now you remember that when you have an emergency and you call the fire department, they will send their normal crew, and each crew may have an EMT with them, who's a specially trained fire department person. Both EMTs that responded to the park both observed trauma to the neck. Well, Arthur remained clear on it despite the FBI's attempt to shake him. The other one was confused by the FBI and kept saying what he saw, but they kept writing it a different way. I saw pictures that clearly indicate to me that there is trauma on the neck. I believe it's a puncture wound in the neck.
Clearly, the American press participated in the cover-up of Foster's murder. Miguel Rodriguez reached out and told, quote, over 100, unquote, reporters much more than you're hearing today. The American press only parroted the official lie that they were spoon-fed by Kenneth Starr's Office of Independent Counsel.
I've talked to a number of people that, from Time Magazine, Newsweek, Nightline, the New York Times, Boston Globe, Atlanta, whatever. There have been well over 100. This matter is so sealed tight, and the reporters are all genuinely interested. I do know that many people have called me back, reporters that I've spent a lot of time with, called me back and said the editors won't allow it to go to press.
Who has the power to threaten a United States attorney without consequence? Miguel Rodriguez was threatened. He was threatened professionally, physically, and personally.
It was the independent counsel themselves and the FBI beat me back and in fact threatened me. Told me to, quote, this is a quote, back off, or it was either back off or back down. They used both of them.
See, this is sensational stuff. This is more interesting than what you see on the news at night, right? But there's this censorship. It's a blatant censorship, like similar to what you had in the Soviet Union. I can give more insight on this. A well-known Nevada businessman told me that he was going to a courthouse in Reno, and he got there, and there's all sorts of commotion, police all over the place, people panicking, and he asked one of the policemen, he says, what's going on? Is this a bomb scare? He says, it's worse than a bomb scare. He said, worse than a bomb scare? He says, yeah. Someone's shot someone inside the courthouse and killed them, said he's going to come back with a case of dynamite and blow the whole courthouse up. So this person I knew got out of there. So, of course, this would be the biggest story, that night and the next day, right? No news at all. So the next day, 2 days later, actually, he called up a good friend of his that worked for the Reno Gazette-Journal and said, what's going on? And this guy admitted, he says, yeah, that happened, but he's evasive, won't say why it wasn't being reported. Next day, it wasn't in the newspaper. So he called him up again. Evasive answers. 3 days later, he talked to him away from the office. And his friend confessed to him, he says, we have minders in the newsroom, and they tell us what we can report and what we can't report. And at this point, you believe that because what you've already seen. When you have the head investigation confess the whole thing's a cover-up, and he tells 100 reporters that, and none of them report it, that's how airtight censorship is. Back to national cases of fake news. There's another murder story, even bigger, and I was deeply involved with it from many angles. Chinagate. I was involved with breaking that, actually 2 different news firms. And what that was that the Chinese military intelligence, their KGB, was sending money to Bill Clinton's campaign because they wanted him to win in '96. And they were getting military secrets in exchange for this. And the bag man, the man transferring the money, was Johnny Chung. And he got arrested and convicted of this, but the beneficiary never got arrested, Bill Clinton. You know, how can that be? There's one other person involved with that, and that was Ron Brown. And you know what, I guess a lot of people here know what happened to Ron Brown. So first, we'll put up the next slide is a picture of Chung. He visited the White House 49 times. During the same period, the director of the...
Secretary Ron Brown and 32 others were on a military plane...
That's one, two... It doesn't have the image? Oh, well, you just saw an image of Johnny Chung at a Christmas party with the Clintons. Okay, I think you do now. And then, you know, we went through this. General Jack Singlaub told me, and he was the commander of all U.S. troops in Korea, that he talked to Admiral Borda in front of a bunch of other high-ranking, you know, flag officers, and Borda said that Clinton had ordered him to give the super silent submarine technology to the Chinese. And he was just appalled. He said, why? Well, the boss said to do this. Well, I think you know why. It's because he was getting, they got it cheap. I mean, these are just hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe a few $1 million, and they got technology that take hundreds of millions, possibly, to develop. So, very good deal on their part, very bad deal for us. Oh, well, the next image I have up, which you don't think there's any images in this, I don't know why that happened, but I'm so happy to have the videos for me. It's Johnny Chung worked for me later. He went straight. He felt bad about this, and so I hired him when I was at NewsMax. I did a news conference he set up, so I talked to the big newspapers from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the United States, Chinese language newspapers. And after that news conference in 2000, you know, China did stop threatening to invade Taiwan. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not, but that was the objective. I was afraid there could be a war between China and the U.S. because the Korean War was started because Truman's Secretary of State, I believe it was, said that Korea wasn't in the vital interest of the United States. So both Russia and North Korea took that as a green light. They won't defend Korea, and that started a war that killed a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people. Okay. See if we can get back some videos. So where does murder come in? Where the murder comes in is that a special prosecutor is put on Ron Brown. And so Ron Brown went to the White House, met with Clinton, told him, you have to get this special prosecutor off my back. If you don't, I'm going to turn state's evidence. Well, that means that Clinton, Bill, and Hillary would both go to prison. Clinton got so mad at Ron Brown, he refused to talk to him. Ron Brown left. He went to his business partner, Nalanda Hill's house, and told her about what happened, all the details, that's how we know, and said, this guy scares me. I think he's capable of killing people. I think he might kill me. Within weeks, he was dead. Let's see if should we get some images up here? Or maybe it's dangerous. Don't do it. Okay. Well, hopefully there's some videos that come up here again, but these are pictures of the plane crash. There's a mountain. The plane hit it dead square. Why would a plane fly right into the center of a peaked mountain? We know even more about this than Vince Foster's case. It was a Boeing 737. He was sent on a trade mission to Bosnia at that time, and Johnny Chung was invited. Bill Clinton wanted him to be on the flight, and Johnny Chung saved his life. He told Ron Brown, he says, what business is there in Bosnia? That saved his life that he didn't go. 34 innocent people were killed to bring down this airplane. The military jet was flying to Dvornik Airport, and then here's another, you know, God thing or whatever, divine intervention. I got on a plane in Washington, D.C., and this military person, Air Force guy, sat next to him, and we started talking. He said, you know, the news media is censored. I'm always, you know, getting this message out. And he says, oh, I know it is. I said, oh, really? He says, yeah. He says, you ever hear of Ron Brown? And I played dumb. Yeah, vaguely. So he says, I know what happened there. He said the plane was grounded because the mechanic found a minor problem in one of the engines. And so a high-ranking officer went out there and says, you sign this thing off. This plane has to leave now. And he refused. He says, you do this or I'll get someone else to do it. So he signed it off. The plane took off. He says, then the commander of the air wing was demoted because of this. He says that was unjust. You know, it was this other guy that caused it. Then I explained to him what you're going to find out, and he went into shock. because he realized that the plane had actually been purposely crashed, and the engine, there's no engine problems at all. You know, that didn't cause the thing at all. And he wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the flight. So this is what happened. Spoofing is something that's been done for centuries. Pirates would put out a lighthouse, and then they build a fire on a beach, and they get ships to crash into an island, and then they rob the cargo. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong would put a transmitter with higher wattage than the one at Da Nang, crank it up, and get our planes to fly over their anti-aircraft guns. There's another way, and this is what happened in the Dvornik thing. The radar shows that the plane was flying to the airport on the correct heading, and then suddenly it did a sharp left turn, and then it did a sharp right turn, and then it headed 10 miles north approximately of the airport and flew right into the mountain that was in heavy fog. That is the reason why the plane had to leave then. The weather conditions were perfect to crash the plane. So then why did he fly into the mountain? The reason was a couple of weeks before this, but after Ron Brown threatened Bill Clinton, the portable radar beacon at the Dvornik airport was stolen. Who needs a portable radar beacon? You know, that's the case the main one goes down, they put it out in the airstrip to well, what basically happened is they turned off the radar beacon at the airport, and they turned on the portable one on the mountain, and that would cause the exact pattern of flight where the plane redirected and went into the mountain. And you know, well, I say here, notice the precision once it hit the mountain. You can't see the precision. Sorry about that, but I'm so glad we have the videos. And you can see these pictures. These pictures, if you go out and look in the Ron Brown case, you can see the plane crash pictures. The pilot at the last second saw the mountain. We know that because the villagers below the mountain said they heard the engines roaring. So he pulled up as hard as he could, he put the cola on, and he almost made it over the top of the mountain. You see the pictures, he almost made it over the top of the mountain. He came in at slow speed, the plane basically survived the crash. He maybe hit 150, 200 miles an hour. And the tail section is totally intact, but the front part of the plane burned later. 2 people survived the crash from what we know, Ron Brown and the flight attendant, Shelley Kelly. She survived until the rescues came up. Now, the rescuers didn't get there for, I think it was 2 hours. Why? They're sent other places. So if you look at the news reports, they said, you know, it was, they crashed out at the sea. It crashed over here. They sent the rescues here and there because they had to take care of work there. So the person that placed the radar beacon on the mountain had to make sure that Ron Brown was dead. That's the whole purpose for crashing the plane. And so I've seen a picture of Ron Brown. He looked like he's in a crawling position, trying to get away. His pants were ripped up, but he didn't have any fatal injuries. But he then later had a .45 caliber bullet hole, or we'll call it hole, parent bullet hole, right through the top of his head, straight down. And that is the only fatal wound that he had. So the guy shot him, is all the evidence. And then later, when the rescues did get there, suddenly the other survivor died. And again, you know, extremely suspicious. All these great pictures you can't see. Sorry about that. So then the cover-up started. We have a video for you. And I have all the pictures of the bullet hole and so forth, and maybe after we finish this, we can put this up or I can help you get them. So Newsweek put out a huge fake news story. They said this was the worst storm in 10 years in Bosnia. And I have a picture, an image of that. CNN went along with it. They said violent storm. But then CNN showed you that there was no storm at all. There was no storm. The official Air Force report said there's no storm at all. And all the reporters know this is fake because if it's the worst storm in months, the airport would have been shut down. A plane landed 5 minutes before, 5 minutes later, and you'll watch the people there live when the plane didn't show up, leaving because they were told that it had crashed.
Commerce Secretary Ron Brown and 32 others were on a military plane that crashed today in a violent storm. There are no known survivors at this time. Croatian Air Control says the plane was cleared to land at Dubrovnik's airport, but instead it apparently went off course and slammed into a cloud-shrouded mountain.
Ambassador Peter Galbraith awaited the Commerce Secretary's arrival in Dubrovnik.
No umbrellas. It wasn't even raining. This is how fake they are. Then the cover-up really started going, because when his body got back to Dover Air Force Base, the forensic photographer found the bullet hole, saw it, photographed it. and we have those photographs. She called over 2 medical doctors, military doctors, pathologists. They were very experienced. One of them was the head pathologist for the first Gulf War, and they said, that does look like a bullet hole. So they called up the White House and told them this and said, we need to do an autopsy. The White House told them, don't do an autopsy, ignore the rules, send them to Arlington for immediate burial, and that's what happened. The forensic photographer was told by the military policeman at the same death examination room that the photos and x-rays were going to be destroyed. She says, why? She says, because they indicate he was shot. Very patriotic lady. When she's leaving, the photos and x-rays were on the light box. She took the same camera she took the original pictures with and went click, 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 and made copies of them all. At NewsMax, we got these pictures later and we released them. That's why we have these pictures. The Air Force admits that their copies are all gone. So this story probably scares them more than any other story. It's because the photos and x-rays, the x-rays show a lead snowstorm. They show metal fragments behind the left eye socket. It's just devastating. And whenever I show this evidence to people, I haven't seen anyone yet that doesn't believe it. And so 34 people were killed to help murder 1 person. And the news media looks like they pre-planned this worst storm in 10 years because they, Time, Newsweek all reported the same number. This, I hope this is sinking in just how devoid of credibility our news media is. So I confronted Sam Donaldson on this and did a $10,000 bet on C-SPAN and in front of about 3,000 people. We'll roll that now.
Okay. Last question. Please make it quick, and I'm going to ask our speakers to have their answers be their summation points, please.
We've talked a little bit about media bias, but actually I don't think that's an important issue compared to news censorship. And I'm going to challenge you that you're aware that news censorship is going on. And I'm going to take one story very quickly, and then I challenge you $10,000 that you can't pass a polygraph test that this story is not being censored. And that is that when Ron Brown's body was taken out of the 737, he had an apparent .45 caliber bullet hole in his head, and there's x-rays and photographs of that hole. There's 3 military doctors that have had their careers ruined because they've come forward with those photos and x-rays, and the forensic photographer. Will you accept a $10,000 wager that you cannot pass a polygraph test that story is being censored? And I have the photographs and the x-rays with me.
No, I don't know anything about it. I haven't examined that story. In fact, I guess I may have heard something about the thesis that... But to use that question as a summation does put me at somewhat a disadvantage.
Yes, it did. After that, I went up and I talked to Sam, and if you can imagine this, he was very submissive to me. He was very shaken by this. I think he realized just how phony he was on a matter of life and death. So he asked if he could keep the photos and x-rays. I said, sure, those are copies. And then I found out later from some CPAC officials that he and Bob Novak went behind the curtain afterwards and spent the next 10 minutes doing nothing but looking at those photos and x-rays and talking about it. And yet, did we ever hear a peep about this? No. They're very afraid of this story. I confronted another person, John Maher, who's the publisher of the Reno Gazette-Journal, the big newspaper in northern Nevada. And he came up with this story that was a little bit hard to believe. He said, oh, that's been covered. And I asked the crowd, there's about 50 people there, and I said, has anyone ever heard this in the newspapers or television? No, not one person. And these were news hounds. And then that didn't bother him because he's just being a total phony. And then he came up with a story. He says, I know all about it. He says, my brother was a commander of the airlift wing that crashed the airplane. So I never heard that before. So his name is John Maher. There wasn't anyone who's even a sergeant in that 86th Air Wing named Maher. So, but I did find out who was the commander, and he was demoted over this thing. And his name is William Stevens. And so I found his picture. Now, We don't want to mess up our videos here, so we're not going to show you the picture. But I was going to ask you if you guys, it could be a blended family, So I was going to ask you folks if you could see the family resemblance. And what it is you know what John Maher looks. Let's go ahead and play this thing, and I'll show you what General Williams looks like.
My brother was intimately involved with the Ron Brown crash. He was in charge of the wing that flew Ron Brown.
Okay, so you see what he looks like. General Williams is an extra dark African American. If you ever seen the movie The Jerk, maybe he was adopted by the Stevens family. I don't know how many people here have seen the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin. I mean, this is how absurd. He tells us in front of a group of 50 people, and he knew I had a camera on him. I mean, why do they do this? Well, they know that censorship is so airtight that they can get away with absurd things like that. He's just trying to get out of one meeting. So, you'd love the picture if you saw it. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. They do such a poor job in lies. It's because they know they can get away with it. A lot of people think that conspiracies are impossible. And this is very convenient to people that are involved with criminal activity. But, I mean, if you talk to someone that's that way, and I'm sure you have, you might point out to them that automatically makes them a Holocaust denier. I mean, the most difficult to cover up conspiracy ever was murdering, about 10 million people, and there's hundreds of thousands of people working in the camps doing this, and there's millions of people in the military, and the government knew what was going on. So millions of people knew what was going on. 10 million people were murdered over a 10-year period. They opened up these camps in like 33 or 34, and it never once made an American newspaper or a British newspaper. So it's sort of shocking how easy it is to cover things up. So you might politely point that out to someone. All the word conspiracy means is two or more people planning to do something criminal. So bank robbery with two people is a conspiracy. Bill Clinton was impeached on what charge? Conspiracy to obstruct justice. So what's the solution? Complaining does no good. That's been tried. You have organizations that point out how phony the news media is. Hasn't done any good. The solution is we have to become the media. We have to own the media. We have to be the media. People like Rush Limbaugh have done a lot of good. Fox News has done although they're afraid of some of these stories you just saw. But an improvement. How much money did it cost Ted Turner to get all that media power he had? Didn't cost him anything. He made over $1 billion doing it. Why aren't we doing that? I'm trying to do that with American Uncensored News Network, but that's what we need to do. I encourage everyone to either do it yourself or help other people doing it. A picture of our things. Let's see. I think I do have, yes, I do have some more videos, and we are terrified of screwing this up, so we're not going to mess with those. But it's a map of the TV. We have 7 TV stations, including 45 in San Jose, Channel 3 in San Francisco, Channel 12 for Marin County, Redding, Chico, Yuba City, Sacramento. And so it's actually a humble start. They're broadcast TV stations, but broadcast is getting bigger. And so we do want to get cable carry, but people are cutting the cord. And so it's actually gone up about 20 or 30% in viewership in the last few years. Another thing is we produced a movie, and my cousin Ron Fink and Linda, his wife, were so kind to battle traffic. They're trying to produce 300 for me. I think he got 137, and they just got back with them. It's being duplicated in Fremont. It's called Who Wins When America Loses? And this is a question you always have to ask. If you're in business, when you're trying to align your interests with the salespeople or whoever, you have to come up with compensation plans that align people's interests. So when America's getting hurt, who's benefiting from this? And that's the title of the movie. We started it just with the title, Who Wins When America Loses? And then we did the investigation. It took about a year. There's a lot of research and work went into this thing. So we'll start off with, I think the next one, give it a shot. Is that a silent thing with a okay, good. We're doing great. Who wins when jobs are destroyed, when cities are destroyed, when families are destroyed, when people's lives are destroyed? There's an evil entity that benefits greatly when America loses. This same organization or people associated with it have committed the vast majority of all the murders have taken place in American history. Almost all racist lynchings were committed by people with ties to this evil entity. It greatly benefited when schools fail and when illiteracy climbs. The next excerpt will actually answer that question, and it'll give you the history of this evil entity. This evil entity is even the most deadly military enemy the United States Army has ever faced.
Today, even though in 1990 that home would have been worth less in the Bronx, there is one entire block in Detroit with only one lady left. When she grew up on that same street as a child in the 1950s, Detroit was more prosperous than New York City was. Today, she's trapped like a prisoner in her worthless home. Listen to her story, what living there was like before the evil entity destroyed Detroit, and how it is today.
Tonight, the story of an entire neighborhood disappearing.
In a matter of 2 summers, this has happened.
This is her memory lane, living across from the house she was raised.
We used to play under the street light till 11, 12 o'clock at night.
The last house, the last story. You've got bars on the inside of your house.
Yes.
It's Mary's life of locks. Lock after lock, another layer of protection after they broke down the bars.
Then the cops never come down here. Never.
We talked with 2 former residents of and asked them to come out for an interview. They, like everyone else here, up and left. They told us today they're not coming back to not for an interview, not ever. We decided to bleep the street name for her safety.
What you have just seen is just one of 6 major destructive things the evil entity has done to America. The evil entity has murdered millions for the cause of human slavery. Planned and committed the Cherokee Trail of Tears murderous death march. Killed more U.S. Army soldiers than any other army has. Been the primary driving force for racist lynchings and riots. Willingly gave control of major cities to mass murdering gangsters. And has been and is currently destroying cities, destroying jobs, destroying families, and destroying people. So who is the evil entity? It is the Democratic Party. This uncensored documentary will now expose the real history of Democrats. And after you view it, we think you will have to agree that Democrats are guilty of each of the shocking crimes you are now watching. We are all preconditioned, often by the evil entity, to believe in moral equivalency between countries and political parties, even though the history of the world proves the opposite. Ronald Reagan eloquently pointed this out in his campaign to destroy another evil entity, the Soviet Union. Listen to what President Reagan said about this and the external evil empire.
Let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, They are the focus of evil in the modern world. I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all, and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Okay, real fast on that. What you saw, slavery was the signature issue of the Democratic Party. And when they lost their first election to Republicans, they went to war against the United States to try to keep slavery going. If you look at on the Cherokee Trail, they campaigned on that. They say, if you vote for us, we'll kill Cherokees, steal their farms and land from them, and then hold lotteries, and you'll get them. And that's unfortunately what happened. If you look at a racist lynching map, it mirrors exactly, and this is between 1860 and 1960, the areas of the highest Democrat voting. And this should be talked about. It's not being talked about. And so there's what's called a Democratic death spiral. This is destroying cities. So when things get worse, it doesn't make any sense. Like Detroit did not vote Democrat in 1960. When they started voting Democrat, things got worse, and then more and more. So today, what's the vote for Detroit after it's been totally destroyed? It's 98% Democrat. Now, do you think the elites are so stupid not to figure out that helps them? Now, what's the opposite? Where's their worst city? Their worst city is Provo, Utah. What percent of the vote do they get there? 12%. It has the highest job growth in the United States, and their murder rate's 1/40th the murder rate in Detroit. So America loses when the Democratic Party wins and the opposite thing around. So we'll just do the next video on that.
Have voters rejected the Democrats after the appalling failure they transformed Detroit into? No, just the opposite. The more people turned toward the Democrats, the worse things got. And then they turned even more to the Democrats. And then things got even worse, and this helped the Democrats even more. In a vicious dog-chasing-its-tail cycle, Detroit has become a Democratic death spiral zone. But since it is so beneficial for Democrat politicians to destroy jobs, neighborhoods, families, and people's lives, did they really fail in Detroit? No, they succeeded greatly. For the people, they failed. But as politicians, they succeeded. They did what would help themselves gain more power. In fact, a nonpartisan group, the Bay Area Center for Voting Research, compiled voting records for all American cities and found the most extremely liberal or democratic city in America was Detroit, with 94% of the vote. Today, it's 98%. This is far better for the Democrats than before their policies failed. In fact, Detroit is the greatest Democrat success story there is. The most extremely conservative or Republican voting city in the study was Provo, Utah, which votes 86% conservative or Republican. In 2012, it's 88%. Those two cities are opposites in many other ways. Studies have shown a direct relationship between murder and political affiliation, as these neighborhood scout reports show. A Detroit citizen is 46 times more likely to be a murderer or to be murdered than a Provo citizen. This year in Provo, the murder rate was 1. In other years, it has been 0. The current murder rate in Detroit is 46. Another way that Detroit, Democrats' greatest success at 98%, is the opposite of Provo, Democrats' greatest failure at 12%, is in compassion and empathy. Provo is objectively the most compassionate city. At the same time, it is the least Democrat. It has the highest rate of giving and volunteerism in America. It is not just Provo. There is a national Democrat compassion and empathy gap, in which Democrats murder much more and give far less. This national giving map shows Democrat areas give significantly less. This detail from Texas shows the amazing correlation between low-giving counties and Democrat counties. And it is not about income levels. Super rich and super Democrat Marin County, California, gives much less than every Republican county in Alabama, or Tennessee, or Utah, even when those other counties commonly have about 1/2 of Marin's $129,000 median income. Another sign of the Democrat compassion and empathy gap is that in their worst failure, Provo, for entertainment they have a festival called Freedom Fest with balloons. And Democrats' greatest success story, Detroit, for entertainment they, for decades, had an arguably satanic festival called Devil's Night, in which for entertainment they burned down their neighbors' homes.
Every October 30th on Devil's Night, the city burned itself down in a frenzy of arson.
Detroit is engulfed in an orgy of arson. It's a holiday tradition, sort of like a mean-spirited Mardi Gras.
We were just sitting there watching TV, and all of a sudden there was a burst of flame, and that was it.
John Holden lived here for 31 years. It was gone in minutes. There were hundreds of fires like this during Devil's Night.
It's hell here on Devil's Night.
And still another way Detroit and Provo are opposites. That is, jobs. Provo is often rated number 1 or 2 nationally for jobs, and being the best place to live. In Detroit, it is the opposite. So many jobs have been destroyed that over 1 million people have fled Detroit. Whereas again, Provo is the opposite, rated as the fastest growing city in America, as people flock to it. Think about it. Where jobs are destroyed, Democrats benefit the most. Where jobs are created the most, it is a political nightmare for Democrats. They spend hundreds of millions on TV ads trying to get an extra few percent of the vote, but can get an extra 40% or more of the vote at no cost by destroying jobs and cities. Ask yourself, do you think Democrat elites are so stupid as to not know this? They cannot openly say this, just as pro wrestlers scripted to lose a match have to pretend to be trying to win and almost pin the opponent before they lose. From killing the Keystone Pipeline, to destroying tens of thousands of energy jobs, to highly destructive new regulations for job creators that have killed millions of jobs, and on and on. If one keeps in mind that destroying jobs is good for Democrats, it becomes quite easy to explain their policies. Turning America into a hellish failure like Detroit would be political heaven for Democrats. If America were to become a national Democrat death spiral zone, that means total success for the Democratic Party.
Yes. I'm going to speed things up a little bit because we got a slow start. So I'm just going to show you 2 more shorter videos. And why would anyone become a Democrat with their horrific history of human rights abuse and failure? So we have 14 we came up. We'll just show 3 here.
2. Censorship and propaganda. Democrat history is censored, and the media constantly puts out propaganda that blames innocent non-Democrats for the crimes and evils Democrats are actually guilty of. 9. Taker, hater, destroyers. People tend to be giver-builders or taker-hater destroyers. There are millions of giver-builders in the Democratic Party, but taker-hater destroyers are super concentrated in the Democratic Party. After discovering that many racist mass-murdering riots with arson and looting were started and committed by Democrats, we searched for cases of Republicans doing the same thing. We were not able to find a single case. 10. Envy, coveting, and jealousy. Often, taker, hater, destroyers become that way from envy. Democrat politicians know creating envy benefits them and constantly promote envy, coveting, and jealousy.
If you got a business, that you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
12. Mob rule mentality. Many of the motivations for identifying as a Democrat overlap, as you have likely noticed. A key motivation is an attraction to mob rule, away from the concepts of rule of law and justice for all. The vast majority of riots of all types today and in the past were committed by Democrats. As this map shows, areas with the highest vote for so-called liberal progressive Democrats mirrors the worst areas for racist lynchings during the same era. 13. Blame others mentality. Today, one of the key strategies of the Democratic Party is to incite and play to a blame others mentality. Listen to their speeches and you'll pick it up. When Democrats murder people with guns, it's not their fault, it's the gun's fault. When Democrats destroy a prosperous city like Detroit, they do not accept any of the blame. Instead, they invent contorted excuses to blame others. 14. People under paranoid control, the politics of division and identity. The number one way that Democrats have controlled their voters over the last 185 years is, as already documented in this movie, to get them to be paranoid of another race, religion, income group, or even sex. The Democratic Party divides Americans into groups, gets those groups to be paranoid of and hateful of each other, and uses that paranoia and hate like a choker collar to control people politically.
As we do this, there is actually a war on women. We can speak with great authority on that subject.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It feels like open season on black men in America, and I'm outraged.
Good. Got one last one, and it's about the most admired Democrat in the country. This guy had tremendous accolades, and we'll just roll it.
The number one motive for murder in America is not robbery. It's arguments at 42%. Since the majority of all murders are committed by people who identify with Democrats, and the number one motive is disagreements, it follows that one of the greatest real dangers of violent death in America is being murdered by a Democrat in a hateful rage, just for disagreeing with them. To the best of our ability, that adds up to about 5,000 Americans that are murdered each year by Democrats, just for disagreeing with them, or about 14 a day. In contrast, sharks, spiders, and snakes combined kill only about 13 Americans a year. So, arguing with the Democrat is about 400 times more dangerous, more likely to kill you than sharks, spiders, and snakes combined. Everyone needs to be aware of this. Your children need to know this, as in high Democrat areas, the number one cause of death for young people is being murdered. For example, the person who arguably was once the most admired Democrat by the party elite is shown here with Democrat Governor Jerry Brown, with San Francisco Mayor George Moscone, with Vice President Walter Mondale, and with First Lady Rosalind Carter. That super admired Democrat got into a disagreement with some of his friends. The result? He murdered over 900 people in one day, including injecting 36 babies with cyanide. His name? Jim Jones. If arguably the most admired man in the Democratic Party was capable of this, it reminds us once more to be very careful dealing with Democrats. Please do not show this to overtly evil or violent Democrats.
Thank you. Thank you. You're an absolutely great crowd. I could go on for another 2 or 3 hours, but I don't think they want me to do that. So thank you so much.
This is the first one that came in, and we might as well start out with sort of the ridiculous and the sublime, and you probably don't even have an opinion on it, but do you think Vince Foster was Hillary's lover?
That's a known factor.
Oh my gosh.
I know the person who used to drive her around was Larry Patterson, chief bodyguard, and he would drive her to the Rose Law Firm resort, and there's like 16 cabins, and there's no one there, and Hillary and Vince would stay at the same cabin. Is open secret in Arkansas that for 8 years they had an affair.
Oh, okay, so that maybe the word is out. We'll be probably jumping around a little bit, which makes it kind of interesting. This is more general. I think you covered it towards the end of your talk. What can we personally do about fake news?
We have to become the news. They will not reform themselves. They never have. We just simply have to become the news. So don't give a penny, any way you can avoid giving any money to them. We need to bankrupt them, and we need to help the people that are putting out good media. And that's the solution, the only solution.
Okay. And then this is more current, so we're coming up to more... Oh, thank you. Oh, all right. Hello. What are your thoughts on the Seth Rich murder? Do you have any comments on that? More recent? There's a lack of expertise on my point on that one, and it does sound suspicious, but
I usually study these things in depth, and I don't have a lot of knowledge, so no comment.
It's better to not, I agree. This is even more recent than that. What is your take on the paucity of information on the Vegas shooting? That was, at first there was a lot of information, and then it went away.
I don't know what the answer is. It just doesn't make sense, and that's obvious. The guy did not fit the profile in any way. Usually, actually, the information does come out. So maybe in a few months we'll come up with a good explanation for it, but I don't blame anyone for being suspicious of it. It just doesn't make sense.
It's weird. What's your opinion? Was the press involved in Fast and Furious cover-up? Did
yeah.
Eric Holder silence the media?
Absolutely. The guy that was sort of the head of the Fast and Furious operation, he was like the go-to guy in the Democratic Party for bringing about gun control. Maybe you can figure that out. Why was he involved in this operation to purposely get guns into the hands of Mexican drug gangs? And the answer is to get people murdered, to make guns look bad. That's the most likely explanation I can come up with. And people should have gone to jail over that. Another case of justice being denied in our court system.
So I don't know about the rest of you, but I can barely watch television in the evening and not being stared at by Tom Steyer. I don't know if anyone else has had that expression. So this question is, do you have any info on Tom Steyer? And is his global warming scam and attempts to succeed Dianne Feinstein?
That's interesting. Well, I don't know anything on the Dianne Feinstein, but in global warming, the purpose of it is one world government. It's that, you have to control all the countries, because if you fix things here, you're not fixing them in Brazil, or you're not fixing them in Mongolia, or whatever. And Al Gore has confessed that. He says, not only, are we doing all these things, but this will lead us to world governance. And they just tell lies, like 98% of science is baloney. The American Meteorology Institute surveyed thousands of their members, degreed meteorologists, and only about 30% of them agreed with the general global warming theory, which is it's dangerous and it's being caused by mankind. 20% agreed with the founder of Weather Channel's John Coleman's statement that it was the greatest scam of all time, and the majority did not believe it.
This is again, it's a factual question. What are your AUN TV stations in the Bay Area? I think you said
Yes,
them quickly. If you could repeat them, and how can we help you?
Oh, thank you. We can talk afterwards, and it's Channel 45 in San Jose off of Loma Prieta. It's Channel 3 San Francisco, Channel 12 Marin County.
Yeah, this is a great kind of a tactical question. How is it possible for all these different news outlets to conspire together without being revealed?
Isn't that interesting?
They're really good at it.
It is. If people are in it, so if you know someone going to the news media, and we should go into the news media, but you have to prepare them that they're going to get fired if they try to do a legitimate job. Look what happened to Miguel Rodriguez. Here he was in the prosecutor that had the investigation, and he couldn't get anyone to report this. So they'll figure out that they have to be phonies and censor things, or they're going to lose their job. And I think that's how they're able to get all these people to go together. And the other thing is they control all the editorships, or you might call them censorships, which is proven basically by what happened in the Vince Foster case. Lots of questions.
Yeah, and some of them, this always happens. You guys kind of think together, so some of them kind of come together. This is sort of interesting. Do you think there is an evil entity behind the threats against Jerry Jones for criticizing Roger Goodell's part in reducing attendance and the handling of the players taking a knee? This is the home of Colin Kaepernick, so that gets probably a lot of press. Interesting.
I won't necessarily offer opinion on that, but the general thing, it did start with Colin Kaepernick, and he is so misguided. I mean, he is what he claims he is against. He's a bigot. He's an anti-police bigot. And as you saw in those scenes when in the town of Wilmington, the Democrats did a military takeover in 1898. And when they did this, they murdered 50 people, they terrorized the black people, they stole their houses from them, they removed all the Republican office holders at gunpoint and put Democrats in. It's the best thing they did in terms of just winning. For the next 70 years in North Carolina, Democrats controlled it. So, I actually got slightly off track. What was the question again? I was going to answer.
Yeah, it was kind of it was convoluted about Jerry Jones and...
right, Colin Kaepernick. Okay,
yes.
so in
Roger Goodell.
that's where that cartoon you saw was, where they dehumanized black people by showing them as vultures clawing at white women and children, and that got people riled up, and they thought they were doing the right thing. Democrats would take pictures after lynchings because they thought they're doing something so good. So they've tortured someone to death or lynched them, and they would stand proudly because they know they'd never get arrested because Democrats believed in lynching. So what Colin Kaepernick is doing is the exact same thing. He's wearing socks that had pigs on for policemen. So he's dehumanizing police and getting people to hate him and calling them slave catchers. He's done that on his Twitter account. And so that's to get people to be paranoid. That's exactly the same thing the Ku Klux Klan did. They dehumanized black people, and they got white people to be paranoid to them, and that led to the lynching. So I think what he's doing is extremely dangerous, and he's clueless.
Do that. Speaking of social media, the next question is, how does social media affect big media monopoly on info? Examples of Facebook, Twitter, etc.
It does hurt, but we want to be big media. but the internet and social media does hurt them. It reduces their control. It used to be there's only 3 television networks in America, and that's a lot more easier. So it hurts them, but we need to drive that wooden stake through their hearts of these people who are doing this new censorship. And we have to be the ABCs, the NBCs, et cetera. We have to have that level of media ownership.
And related to that, how do we reach our children who were indoctrinated by California schools, second lowest in the U.S., and being guilted by their Facebook bully friends?
Huge problem, huge problem. And whatever you can do to prevent. One thing is, if it's possible, is get them out of government schools, as I call them. The public controls private schools, the government controls government schools. It's a problem we have to solve. People are afraid to solve it. The only time Republicans, and by the way, this was not an endorsement of Republicans at all. This is strictly, I was talking about the history of the Democratic Party. The only time they've ever tried is in Colorado. It's sort of a weak attempt. I just give you a quick fact out here. I did a speech in Reno to a group of like the 50 elites of the Republican Party in Northern California, office holders, county chairman, et cetera. And I said, are the Republican Party really trying to win elections? And I went through, I said, what are they doing about news censorship, the news being against them? And they go, absolutely nothing. What are they doing about the government schools indoctrinating students to vote Democrat? Nothing. And they agreed it's like costing 30% of the youth vote. So at the end, I did this thing. Remember, these are elites, some of them nationally famous politicians. And I took a vote. Was the Republican Party trying to win? 9 people abstained. 1 person said the Republican Party is trying to win elections. And 40 people said, Republican officials said the Republican Party is purposely. Now, when they walked in the room, they never thought that. But when we went through a list of 25 things, it's hard to explain why they don't do these things to help win. So I think there are moles inside the Republican Party sabotaging. It's so easy to get in. I mean, you just show up and you volunteer and you kiss up to everybody, and you'll be in the leadership within months.
Now we have a math problem.
Okay.
You've used there is a fact. Don't know if it's substantiated, that only about 1 in 100 people know someone who's been murdered, whereas the Clintons know lots, a few dozen people that have been murdered. You have any thoughts on that?
It is close to a statistical proof that they're killing people, because you think about it. In fact, once Hillary Clinton once said, she's at a funeral, gee, so many of her friends are dying. Well, yeah, it's because you're killing them, So yes, I know 2 people killed by Jim Jones. I know 1 other person was killed, and it's all violent deaths. Here's the other thing: usually there's witnesses when someone dies. You ever notice there's never a witness of the death itself when they involve the Clintons? Well, there are witnesses, the people killing them, but interesting, huh? In the Reagan administration, he only lost 1 person, and it's Malcolm Balkridge, and he's a rodeo rider, and the horse fell back on him, and there's like 10 people that saw it happen. Clinton, how many people died? 10 people, and there's never any witnesses.
Quite a mystery. This question came in later regarding Tom Steyer's commercial.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't any eye, be able to buy a commercial time showing a human abortion as a 30-second TV commercial?
Sure, but if you do that, I know people have taken out ads, $20,000, $30,000 ads in New York Times, and they say, your cause is good, but you're feeding the enemy. So if you try to get media exposure, don't give the money to anyone that's our enemies. They see you as their enemies. You're against what they're in favor of. So if you're it's better, instead of buying ad time, it's better to own the media, or at least do it in such a way that you're getting money to the good people, or even better, figure out a way to make money doing it. I did this once. We ran TV infomercials where people would buy a video, but we're getting the story out about Ron Brown. I did this with George Putnam. And it would cover like 80 or 90% of the cost of the ads in terms of bringing revenue in. And if you get over 100%, that's really gold. Then you can go on forever.
And maybe as a last one to kind of show the appreciation of our audience tonight, why do you not have or on an FNC show?
Oh, that's a very nice compliment. Set it up for me and I'll do it.
Thanks.
I know some people at Fox, but I don't consider myself to be good. Like, I've done some talk radio as a host. It's a hard job. It's quite a skill, so I don't think that's my strongest suit.
Yeah, I hear that. It looks easier than it is. Ladies and gentlemen, Dana Allen.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.